oui, responsable base de données au Jardin botanique. Donc, c'est un plaisir de vous avoir encore ce matin avec nous. Et je pense qu'on va passer un très bon moment à apprendre beaucoup plus de choses qu'hier. Et on va avoir agronome William Sinia comme mentor avec nous. On va avoir Annabella Floss et aussi Paula Zermoglio. Mais Paula, c'est elle qui va faire la présentation d'aujourd'hui. On a 3 mentors, mais aujourd'hui, c'est Paula. Hier, c'était Annabella Floss. Et aujourd'hui, c'est Paula Zermoglio qui va faire la présentation avec pour vous. Donc,
sans oublier qu'on a le jardin botanique Naples qui est en direct également.
Exactement. On a le jardin botanique Naples de Floride qui est avec nous aussi. Donc, ils sont en ligne aussi et ils vont suivre la formation avec nous. Et donc, je vais laisser Paula s'introduire et se présenter et ensuite, elle ira directement dans la formation avec vous. Donc, elle va faire l'approche, le partage d'écran en anglais, mais je sais que vous devriez avoir le document en français déjà pour suivre avec elle. Donc, si c'est possible, si vous avez Internet, je vais essayer de partager mon Internet avec vous pour que vous puissiez avoir le document Drive. Donc, comme ça, vous pouvez suivre ensemble. Quand elle change de slide, vous serez en mesure de changer de slide aussi. Vous avez la version française et elle a la version anglaise. Donc, merci à vous et déjà
Merci.
Oh, ok, ok. Maman dit ça après. Ok. Mais sinon, il y a besoin de dire un bagage parce que tu as dit directement, juste pour représenter tout participant. Ça va penser. On dit un bagage pour représenter tout participant?
Non, comme nous sommes pour venir,
Ok. Nous avons fait ça à la fin. So I am back to you right now. So Paula, you can do your introduction, and then after we can go straight to the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie. I'm happy to be here for this second day of this biodiversity data mobilization in Haiti workshop. Welcome everyone. We will today talk about biodiversity data standards, which is an important part of the process of sharing biodiversity data. So I will start sharing my screen. Let me know, please, if you can see it.
Yes, Paula.
Okay, thanks, Annabella. So we are also live streaming in the YouTube channel, so you can follow the video there or check it after once the session is over. So let's start. And let's start with asking, what is a standard? So a standard, we can think about it as a norm, a convention, a specification, a requirement, a restriction. So standards are all those things. And standards provide us clarity and aid us in communicating information. So, for example, if we have coordinates for a location, like the ones that are shown here, we have coordinates of latitude and longitude, north and west, with degrees, minutes, and seconds. We can identify different standards that are used in capturing those coordinates. For example, those coordinates are measurements. They are geographic coordinates. They also are presented in a particular format, in this case, degrees, minutes, and seconds. They use a numerical system, the sexagesimal system. They use a particular kind of numbers, the Indo-Arabic. They are using also a particular language, in this case, English. You see the N and the W for north and west. They are also using a particular alphabet, Latin, some particular symbols that are typographic, and even the font that we're using, which is in this case Times New Roman, is also a standard, right? So there are norms and rules and restrictions that we're using in presenting this kind of information. So to give you an idea of the types of standards that we can find out there are standards for types of data. For instance, restrictions in the values of the fields. For example, if a field contains text, if it contains dates, integers, or if they are Boolean fields. We have also standards for data values, which are restrictions in the values of the field. For example, if we have a field that captures the country codes, we have a certain list of possible valid country codes. If we are capturing latitude, latitude is only between -90 and 90 degrees. So those are restrictions in the values that we can use. There are also standards for format that imply restrictions in the representation of the data. And an example here would be dates. When we're capturing dates, we have standards that indicate that we should do it first indicating the year, then the month, then the day. Also for time, also for coordinates. We have those standards on the format in which we capture them. There are also standards for encoding. There are rules for interpreting the bytes. There are very various encodings that we could use. One of the most common that we might have seen around is UTF-8. And there are others that I'm going to mention here that are referring to application schemas. Application schemas are specific combinations of standards and datasets for a particular application. We will see during this talk the Darwin Core, simple Darwin Core, and the Darwin Core archive. We will talk more about this later on. We also have other kind of format standards that have to do with the dataset structure. So it will tell us if for example, if the data is in XML format, in CSV, that's comma separated value format, in JSON, there are several formats that a dataset can be in. And also for transfer protocols. I'm sure you've seen in a web page that says HTTP at the beginning of the URL. Well, that's a standard way to indicate a transfer protocol that indicates where and how to share the content that we have. So as you see, there are very different types of standards, and standards are all over. And so let's here now remember some key concepts about biodiversity data. So biodiversity data are organized in data sets. Those data sets are described by metadata. Metadata is capturing a file that can have information, for example, about the title of the data set, the contact information for the people that build that data set, the organizations that are associated, etc., etc. So the metadata describes the data set. Inside a data set, there are records. So the data set is a collection of records. And in each record, we can identify different fields. So a record is a collection of fields, which are properties, elements, concepts. In the example that is on the slide, we have in the first column the family of a particular specimen, the common name, the genus, the specific epithet, and so on. So for each field, in each record, we will have a value. So the fields contain values. In the example shown, we have a vernacular name is the field, and we have the value, that is the Carolina Sphinx for that particular record. So to summarize, we have data sets, which are described by metadata. Data sets are a collection of records, and records have fields, and for each field we have values. And what does this have to do with standards? Well, at all these levels, we can apply standards, norms, restrictions at the dataset level and down to the values of each field. So it will be very important to understand which are the standards that we should apply, when and how. So which standards do we use for biodiversity data? I mentioned that there are many standards available. So on one hand, we use some standards that are global, which means they are widely used in all the community. And we also use some restricted standards. And restricted can be in the sense of they are local, regional, also thematic. And on the other hand, we can separate or identify standards that are built and maintained by our own community. They're our community standards, and those are typically created and managed by the Biodiversity Information Standards Organization, that is sometimes known or better known as TDWG, TDWG. That's because of its former name. So Biodiversity Information Standards creates and maintains standards that are specifically for biodiversity data. And we also use standards from other disciplines. For example, we use ISO norms, for instance, for country codes, ISO for dates, ISO for time. So the idea here is that if a standard already exists in other communities, we have no need to reinvent the wheel and make a brand new standard. It's better to reuse a standard that is already available. So as I mentioned before, in our community, Biodiversity Information Standards is the organization that creates and maintains standards. And I invite you to visit the webpage of this organization and to contact any of us who are participating in it. It has many groups working on different aspects of standards. And it also has an annual meeting. So you can check for the meeting for this year, and you're very welcome to join us in that meeting that is happening this year in October. So among the standards that Biodiversity Information Standards maintains, we see here a list of current standards and 2005 standards and some draft ones, that is standards that we're working on right now. So one of the most widely used ones are Darwin Core and Audubon Core, and there is also a wide use of ABCD, especially in the European community. They use it pretty often, but we're going to center on the Darwin Core standard, which is the most widely used. So let's talk about it a little bit. Let's introduce it. What is Darwin Core? So Darwin Core is a list of terms. A list of terms we can think of in a spreadsheet, for example. If we're working with a spreadsheet, it would be the names of our columns, the fields. So Darwin Core is a list of terms and their definitions that are related with biodiversity data. If we look at the whole list of terms that Darwin Core has, we may be a little bit overwhelmed. Now, let's stop for a second, because this is simpler than it looks. So just to start, let's say that Darwin Core terms are organized in classes. So our groups are grouped in different classes that have to do with particular characteristics. So for example, there is an occurrence class, there is an event class, there is a location class, and each class gathers sets of terms within Darwin Core. So let's see an example. So I showed you here the soup of terms, of all the terms in Darwin Core, and we can identify different sets of them that constitute classes. So there is one class and there is another class that has to do with occurrence. Well, this is the classes, those are classes themselves. We have terms related with event. We have terms related with location, which are many, as you can see. We have other terms that have to do with geological context, with identification, with taxon, with measurements, and with relationships between things. Let's call it things for now. Now, among all these, if you start looking into them, you will see many that you're probably familiar with. So for example, data set name, we can recognize. Country, we can recognize. Decimal latitude, field nodes, sex, infraspecific epithet, scientific name. Well, there are many that we might be familiar with. So how do we know what these terms are and what are their definitions? Well, there is a Darwin Core quick reference guide that we can consult online, and that has for us those definitions, comments, and examples for every term. And on the screen, you can see here how the Darwin Core quick reference guide looks, and listed, you can see on the right the classes of terms. So if we wanted, for example, to see location terms, we will go to the location class and check for all the terms that apply. So let's give an example here of a term in the location class, the term country. So as you see here, it has an identifier which uniquely identifies this term in the standard. It has a definition, in this case, the name of the country or major administrative unit in which the location occurs. That's the definition of the term in the standard. Then it has comments, and in this case, it has a recommendation on how to use this term. And then it has examples. So in this particular case, we see that this term recommends using a controlled vocabulary. There are many terms in Darwin Core that have this recommendation. This means, for example, for this term, for country, we don't want to just put any value. We want the names of the country to be controlled. So what is the advantage of using a controlled vocabulary? Well, that it improves the data quality, and therefore it improves the data discoverability. So we can find data in a more in an easier way. So let me switch now to show you the quick reference guide here. So just to explore it a little bit. So this is the quick reference guide. As I said, here we have on the right the classes of terms. And so let's go, for example, as I was showing you, to the location class. That takes us to the list of terms that are within this class. And we can see in this one many that we might immediately recognize, like continent, water body, locality, and we have decimal longitude and georeference remarks. So you can explore these terms and go to each one to see their definition. If you click on them, you can go to see their definition, the comments and the examples for each one. They are all listed in the same page, so you can always scroll up and down and look for them, or you can navigate the classes and see what the terms are about. For sharing biodiversity data, we use this standard, as I said, pretty often. I mean, not to say all the time. And so it's important that you get familiar with it. I know it can be scary at first. It's a lot of terms, but don't worry. We will walk you through them, and you can explore them, and you can ask questions about it. We will see, I will show you that we have a very active community around Darwin Core, and there are people out there in the community that are willing to answer your questions. So don't be shy. I will show you the link to those community forum later in the presentation. So I invite you to go to that page, to the Darwin Core page here. So this is kind of a game that we're going to play. It's not exactly, but it's an activity that we can do right now. So go to the Darwin Core page, to the quick reference guide, which is this one here. You will see the screen that I just showed you with all the terms. And I would like you to answer the following question. Which is the term in Darwin Core to capture who observed these parakeets? I don't want you to tell me who did it. I know who did it. It was Pedro Gennaro Rodriguez. We know the guy, we know the name, but I want you to tell me what would be the name for the field in Darwin Core to capture that information. So once you have explored the Darwin Core page, you can capture your answer to this question in this web address that is down here. That is, let me see if I can see it, is www.menti.com, and you have to use this code to enter your answer. So remember, what's the term in Darwin Core to capture who observed these parakeets? So I will switch now to that page and see if we get answers here. Okay, can you see that? Can you see my screen?
Yes, Paula.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So we have one answer.
Yes,
So someone answered identified by. So don't be shy. We will give you a couple of minutes to go through the Darwin Core page. So we'll be here and we'll see what answers we get.
Okay. I'm gonna just give them like a quick explanation. Maybe it's not pretty clear for them. So just give me a second.
Yes, no problem. Marie, are we going okay there?
Yes, we okay. We're just trying to, guide the people to go to the link and answer the question. But they have the idea already. But I just wanted us to do the exercise,
Okay, excellent.
So I was trying. Okay. I'm entering the code just to answer. If I put location. Pa gen yon lot moun gen akse avel? What did they say? Okay.
But it's that. You see that. Kami tinong ato.
So one question, Marie, are the participants there seeing my screen or your screen?
They see yours.
Oh, okay, great.
Some of us already send you answers. We use location, identification.
Yes, I see them here. We already have 6 answers. It says down there.
It's good. But
Do you think we can continue right now? Because some people were having difficulties to get to their to the slides, to the presentation. So the ones who are able to, they just put the answers.
Okay, yes, we can continue. The idea of this was that everyone would go to look at the standard and try to find the correct term to use to capture this information about who observed the parakeets that were in the picture. So what is interesting here is that you can see in the results of at least of the people who has answered that there are different options that people think could be used. So I'm gonna tell you which is the correct one, and the correct one is recorded by. Sometimes this is not obvious because depending on the language that one is using, one doesn't think of recorded as someone who collected or observed something. But if we go to the definition here of recorded by, we see that is the list of people, the names of the people, groups, or organizations responsible for recording the occurrence. That is the collector or observer. So in this case, who observed is the observer. So we would use recorded by as the term to capture this information. One thing that you might notice is that the name of the term has a particular format. So for terms that are properties that are not names of classes, they start with lowercase, and the second word is put together and with capital letter. So in here, for example, in this recorded by, this B should be capitalized. That's the name that is given to the terms. So we can come back to this as you keep going and see what happened with the other options, and we can explain why the other options aren't correct. But I will let you keep doing it until we have more answers, and maybe we can come back to this later. So now we will continue with the presentation. So you've seen now that there are many Darwin Core terms. There are a little less than 200 terms. That's a lot. So the question that comes to mind is it necessary to use all the Darwin Core terms? And the answer is no, it is not necessary. So for example, if we are capturing data about contemporary specimens, preserved specimens, for instance, specimens that we have in a museum collection or in a herbarium from recent times, we don't have any need probably to use the geological context terms because they don't really apply. That all the specimens are contemporary. So we don't have to use them. So they are there in case we need them, but we have to choose which Darwin Core terms we should use. Now, if we think of what's best to share, we always say, share as much information as you have. So as detailed as you have it. So among the Darwin Core terms, there are in the GBIF guidelines for data quality and in their requirements, there are a series of Darwin Core terms that are required, some that are strongly recommended, and some that they recommend to share if you have them available. So the terms that are required for publication in GBIF are these four at the top: occurrence ID, basis of record, scientific name, and event date. Then there are a series of strongly recommended that include country code, taxon rank, kingdom, decimal latitude and longitude, etc. And then there are some that GBIF recommends to share if you have that information. But again, if you have more information than these terms listed here, you should share it, because it's best to have as much information available as possible. Now, when should we use Darwin Core? There are two instances, let's say. One is at the source, that is in our own databases, in our institutions. And another step is when we share data. So when we share data, it's important that we use Darwin Core, because that allows us to share that information in a way that everyone else can understand it. So I will give you an easy example. If we have a field, a column in our spreadsheets that is a pays for country, people that only speak in English will not understand that that is the country field. So the idea is that we would use names for the fields that are common to everyone. And that's what Darwin Core provides, is the names for those fields. So when we share the data, it's important that we use Darwin Core. Now at the source, we can use it or not. So for example, if we want our database in our collection or institution to have the names of the fields in French, in German, in Spanish, in Chinese, we can do so. So instead of having year, as Darwin Core says for year, we can have année, and that's perfectly fine. And also we have to consider that we might want to use other fields to capture other information, like for example, the shelf number or internal fields for the management of the collection. And those fields we might not want to share that information, and that is okay. We can still have them in our own databases. So not everything in our databases has to be in Darwin Core. We can have our databases as we like, as long as we can map the important information when we go to the sharing step. So things that are not in Darwin Core in our databases, if they can be mapped to Darwin Core, they can be shared. So that mapping step will become very important. And let's give some examples of mapping. So here on the left, I have original fields with their values. So for example, one of the fields in my spreadsheet is date, and one of my values is 9th of May, 1985. We can do a direct mapping to a field in Darwin Core that is called verbatim event date. That means original event date information. And so we can say this original field maps directly to this term in Darwin Core. Those kind of direct mappings will happen very, very often when we do the mapping exercise from our database to Darwin Core. There are also indirect mappings. And these indirect mappings can involve doing some data transformations. So from that same original field, we can complete other Darwin Core terms. So for example, we can complete the Darwin Core term event date. What's the difference between event date and verbatim event date? That event date requires that the information is in a particular format. In this case, in the ISO standard for dates, which is year, month, and day. So from the original information, we can derive this information for the event date formatted as we need it. From this same original field, we can infer the year, the month, and the day, which are also Darwin Core terms. and other date terms that are start day of year and end day of year. So all this will be indirect mappings because we have to do some transformation to the original values in order to complete these fields. And to give you another example of indirect mappings, we have, for example, here two fields where I'm capturing if the specimens have skin or tissue associated. And in my database, I put yes and yes. It has skin, yes, it has tissue. So that information, I can share it in a Darwin Core term that is called preparations. But as you see, preparations could gather the information from both those fields. So what I have to do is transform this into a value that can fit in these preparations Darwin Core term, which would be in the way that is shown here: skin, space, vertical bar, space, tissue. So we see that we have we can lump values or we can split values into different fields, all these doing indirect mapping. Now, oops, sorry. What will be very, very important to be able to map correctly is to know the original data. That is, I have to understand what my database has, which kinds of data, what they refer to, and also, of course, know the standard so that we can understand which original field would map to which term in Darwin Core. And this means that we have to be familiar with the definitions of the terms. As I said before, there are many, many, many terms in Darwin Core, so one does not expect you to know them all or to know them by heart. You can always go back to the quick reference guide and check the definitions and check the examples, and again, ask the questions about any doubt that might arise. So, an important issue to understand is, what do we do with fields that do not map to Darwin Core? Not directly, not indirectly. So one option is to not include them, that is, to not share those data. An example of this would be if we have in our databases a field that is shelf number, and we don't want to share that information, and it doesn't have a direct mapping to Darwin Core, so we just simply, we don't share it. Another option, if it is information that we do want to share, but there is no Darwin Core term to map to, is to include that information in what we call general fields. For example, the remarks field, there are location remarks, georeference remarks, occurrence remarks. So Darwin Core has several terms, remark terms for different kinds of information. Or in the field called dynamic properties, where one can capture characteristics of the record that one is sharing. And a third option, which we're going to see in a little more detail in a couple of minutes, is to use Darwin Core extensions. We'll see what they are in very soon. So let's see an example of what means to use a general field. Suppose that we want to share measurements. We have an animal and we measure different parts of the animal, and we want to share that information, but Darwin Core doesn't have a specific term for the length of the tail or the length of the leg. So we have to include that information in a general field that is dynamic properties. In this case, this field has to be formatted in a certain way, or it's recommended that you do. And so it would look like this. So the length of the tarsus, the right one. So you suppose that we have an insect and we're measuring tarsi of the different legs. Length of the tarsus, the right leg in millimeters, and then the value. And then the same for the second tarsus, and then we can capture when the measurement was performed, and so on. So if we have properties, we can capture them in this field. If we wanted, for instance, if we had a plant, let's give another example. We have a plant and we want to put the color of the plant, well, or of the flowers. We don't have a specific term in Darwin Core to do that. So we use the term dynamic properties, and we would put here color, column, I don't know, pink. So all those characteristics we can gather under this term. Now, the other solution is to share data using Darwin Core extensions. So to understand what is an extension, we have to see what is a core and what is an extension. So we're going to talk about cores and extensions. So what are cores? Cores are data files that are defined by the focus that we give to the data. So there are three possible cores to share data through the GBIF network. So one is the occurrence core. The occurrence core focuses on taxa that are recorded at a given time and at a given location. So the focus is what, where, and when. Is this specimen was collected or observed here on this date. So it's what, where, and when is an occurrence core. So we would have a file, a table, a set of records that have at least those data. For instance, we will have the species A in this location observed on this date. And we can have other information, of course, associated, but this is the basic information that we need for an occurrence core. The second type of core is the taxon core. The taxon core focuses on the taxa, and those taxa are typically from a particular region or sharing some common characteristics. So the focus here is in the what, of course, in a particular where or with certain characteristics. So an example are, well, these are the typical checklists. So we're saying these specimens, these groups of specimens is the list of species that are found in this national park, for example. And we're focusing on the species, on the what. And the third type of core is the event core. And this one focuses on the collection or observation event. There's typically field studies, surveys that include protocols, sample sizes, and locations. So suppose we're going to do a field trip, and of course we're going to look for something, for a what here, for some sets of species or any other taxon level. But what will be important here, what will be the focus in the event core is the where, when, and how. How meaning the protocols that we use, the sample size, the effort. So it's where, when, and how. And we can have associated specimens, for instance, that we collected during that event, sampling event. So these are the possible cores. Now let's go to what is an extension. Extensions are data files that have additional information about the records in the core. So for example, if we have an occurrence core, remember that was focused on what, when, and where. So typically, a museum collection would have data shared as an occurrence core. So we have specimen A that was collected in location 1 on this date. That would be the records in the core. And we may have information about photos associated with those specimens. So we took different pictures. I think I lost connection. Could that be?
Yep.
Okay, sorry for that. Sharing again. I don't know where I got cut. If you can.
I think it's working again. Just
Okay.
wait.
So, sorry for that.
Yeah.
So what was the last thing that you heard?
All.
Did you hear the last one?
All I think was the previous slide.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
nothing about
just
this one.
Yeah, we can just go to the previous slide if you want to.
Okay. So did you hear all this explanation?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
It just got up like for a few seconds.
Oh, okay. So let's summarize a little bit here, and when we move forward. So the occurrence core is based on the what, where, and when. The taxon core is focused on the what, and the event core is focused on the where, when, and how. So with that in mind, let's go see what extensions are. So extensions are data files that have additional information about records in the core. So let's give an example. We have a museum collection that has specimens of certain species collected in certain places and at certain times or dates. So that typically will be shared as an occurrence core because we have what, when, and where. Now we might have taken photos of those specimens. And so we have also the data about the photos. That is, who took the photos, when, what is the license for each photo, if there are links where those photos can be accessed, etc. So those are additional information about the records that we're sharing in the core. And what is important about extensions is that they allow us to capture one-to-many relationships. So in the example that I was giving before, a single specimen may have many photos. And so we would have information for each of the photos about who took them, when, the license, etc. And so having extensions allows us to share that information for each of the photos that we have, all related to a single specimen that is captured in a record in the core. And I think I got disconnected again.
You say no for us, it's okay?
No, it's
Yeah.
okay.
It's open.
Okay,
The microphone is open. Yeah, it's open.
Okay. And can you see my
I think
screen
it's
now?
just the internet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm so
we can
sorry
see
for
it.
the internet connection today is terrible. I'm so sorry. Okay, so now we see the screen and you can hear my voice, so I will continue. So
Yeah, we can hear you.
the core and the extensions can be thought of as what we call the star schema, or our organized structure in a star schema, where we have the core in the center of the star, and in each arm we have extensions. And so those extensions are associated or related to the core by identifiers, what we call IDs. And so, for example, we can have an occurrence core and an extension for capturing the images information, another extension for capturing identification history, another extension to capture measurements about the specimens. Like as I was mentioning before, we could capture characteristics of measurements like length or color or all those things that don't have a particular term in Darwin Core, specific term. So the idea is that this would be the schema where the core is connected, let's say, to the extensions by identifiers. So the simplified image will be this: a core and connections by IDs to the extensions. This is only an introduction to extensions, to the general concept of extensions, but there is a little more to learn about them, specifically about how to deal with the identifiers. And I suggest that you visit the videos that are available through the Darwin Core Hour initiative, because there are some talks that refer specifically to this topic. I will share the link with you at the end of the presentation, but so that you know what extensions are in general terms and that they are available to you. So which are the available extensions? Well, there are many. As I was mentioning before, there is a measurements or facts, there is an identification history, there is Audubon media to share information about media, photos and videos. So overall, there are currently today 32 stable extensions, and there are other 19 that are under development, and probably there are more under development that have not been publicly shared yet. So you see there are more than 50 extensions available. And so in this web page that is on the screen, you can look at the available extensions and see what they are about. So I invite you to visit that page, and of course to ask any questions that you may have. Now, so we've seen the third option for the fields that don't map directly or indirectly to Darwin Core. Now, how do we share data included in extensions? And that brings me to a broader question, which is, how do we share data? That's a bigger question there. And the answer to that, at least for our purposes, is through Darwin Core archives. And so we're going to explain what a Darwin Core archive is, what it's composed of. But keep in mind that Darwin Core is a standard, and Darwin Core archive is a way to share data that is using that, potentially is using that standard. So one is a standard that determines call it the names of the fields that we're going to use, and another way is a way in which we share data. So the Darwin Core archive, we're going to see the pieces that it has. So it starts with two files. One is the file about the, in this case, specimens. So suppose we're sharing data in a museum collection. So we have a a file that has all the records of the birds in our collection. Then we have another file that describes the specimens file. And here we have to be careful to make the distinction between this meta file and metadata. It's not the same. The meta file, what it's doing is describing the structure of this file. So for example, it's saying how many columns we have, which are the names of the columns. And so it's giving us the structure of the data. So we start with those two, the data and one that describes the structure. So this is how it looks, that meta file. So you can see here the encoding, you can see the names of the fields. So it's saying, well, you have one column for institution code, one column for catalog number, one column for recorded by, and so on. So it's describing the structure of the data file. So once we have those two, then we have to add another file that describes the metadata. Remember that we mentioned today that metadata describes what the data is about, like what's the title of the data set, who made it, which are the organizations, and so on and so forth. So that's the metadata of the data set, which is this one, the central one, which is our specimens data. And this metadata file is typically constructed using a standard that is the ecological metadata language, that is EML. And so you can see here a set of characteristics that this EML file contains. As I was saying, title, summary, the citation, the context, the scope, etc., etc. And Annabella was mentioning in her talk yesterday that one can share this metadata independently of the data itself. So one can just publish the metadata. It's not very, it's not usual that people will do that, but you can, and it's fine to do it. So this is how it looks. I know it looks horrible for those of us who are not used to this kind of files, but if you look at it with kind eyes, you see that you have the data set, an identifier, the title. So this is the title of this data set, the creator, this is the name, and this is the surname, the organization of the creator and his role, and so on and so forth. So it's giving metadata about the data set. Yes, can you hear me? Marie? Can you hear me? Annabella, Marie?
I can hear you, Paula.
Oh, thanks, Carly. I don't know.
Paula, are you there? We can't hear you anymore.
Oh, okay. I hear you. I hear you. Can you hear me? Annabella and Carly, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. I wonder if Annabella can.
I don't know. I'm checking. But I think we lost Marie. So let's stop for a second.
Pas attendre. M'écrit li di m'li tande mais même pas attendre.
Marie, can you hear me?
Yes, you're there.
Okay, so Annabella and Carly can hear me, so my connection seems to be okay, but Marie cannot. So we will wait just one moment to continue. Okay, so they are going to try to reconnect now, and we will then keep going.
We hear you right now. Don't need to disconnect.
Oh, okay. So we're all back.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So let's go back to this EML file. That is the file that describes the metadata. I don't know what you heard, but this is how it looks like. And so we can see here information about the title, the creator, the institution of the creator, and so on. So it's all the metadata about the data set. Now, so back to our scheme here, we had the specimens, the meta file that describes the structure, the EML that has the metadata, and we can add extensions as we were talking about. So for example, an identification history extension, extensions for the information about the photos taken of the specimens, and as many extensions as we want. So these are just examples. So once we have those files, there are the data, the file with the mapping, that is the structure, the metadata, and any extensions that we want to include. We compress all those files, and there we have the Darwin Core archive. So the Darwin Core archive is a compressed file that contains the data, the structure of the data, the metadata, and any extensions that we want to include. So it's just that. That's a Darwin Core archive. So it's a way that we use to share data through the GBIF network. So the characteristics of a Darwin Core archive are that it has simple format. All the files inside of it are text files. It's efficient in its storing because it's compressed. It's efficient in aggregation because we only have one file that contains all the others. We can access it easily. We do not require any specialized software or application to access it, and it's extendable. That means files are related in a single file, and so we can include within it as many extensions as we want. And so this Darwin Core archive is the preferred format for publishing data through the GBIF network. So how does it look, a Darwin Core archive, or how do we get it when we go to the GBIF portal? So in the GBIF portal, here I have an example of a collection data set from a collection in Argentina. And so in here, we have a download option for this data set. And we can see in there that one of the options is the Darwin Core archive that we can download. And that, what gives us is a zipped file, a compressed file, as we were seeing. And in this case, that compressed file, when we open it, will have the occurrences, which is the equivalent to specimens that I was showing, that is the data, the meta that describes the structure, and the metadata. In this case, it doesn't have any extensions, but it could. If it had extensions, we would see it listed here as other files within that compressed one. So simply as that, we go to the GBIF portal, and any data set that we want to download, we can download the Darwin Core archive, and we will have all that information included. So the next question would be, how do we build the Darwin Core archive? So, okay, we saw the elements that it has, the data, the structure, the metadata, and the extensions, but how do we actually put it together? And related to that, how does it make it to the portals? We see that we can download it from the portal, from the GBIF portal, but how do we put it there? So that brings me to talking about a toolkit that we use to share data through GBIF, that is the Integrated Publishing Toolkit, or IPT. And so we will see it very briefly here because we will have a practice on another day of the workshop specifically for IPT, but so that we complete this circle of sharing data, I will mention some things here. So the IPT is a free open source tool that helps us to publish and share the biodiversity data through the GBIF network. So if you want to read more details about it, there is this link down here, gbif.org/IPT. And to show you more or less how it looks, as said, we will go into details. When we open IPT, we see something like this, either with test mode or not. This has test mode because it's just for training. And we will see a screen like this one. And so what can we do with IPT? Very briefly, we can upload our data. That is, for example, our collection, our herbaria, or whatever data that we're going to share. We upload that file. The next step is to map to Darwin Core. So IPT allows us to map very easily to Darwin Core. We will see this in our session on Thursday. Then we have to complete the metadata. And so IPT will offer us a series of fields that we have to complete where we put our names and names of the people responsible of the data set and the organization and the geographic scope, the taxonomic scope, sampling methods if we have them, and any additional information that is related to the data set. So we have different fields there that we just type in the information. It's easy. It can be long to do sometimes, but it's very easy to complete. And then we publish the data. And for that, when we have all the previous steps ready, we just click publish and we're done. That's all that we have to do, basically. So as you see, the steps are relatively easy: upload, map, provide the metadata, and publish. And the beauty of it is that IPT generates the Darwin Core archive for us. We don't have to do anything else. So once we have completed those 4 steps, the Darwin Core archive is ready. We don't have to do anything else. And so to summarize this, this process, we have our data. And remember that our data can be already using Darwin Core or not. We can be using our own names for the fields. We upload those data to the IPT, and in there, we do the mapping to Darwin Core. We add the metadata, IPT builds the Darwin Core archive, And that Darwin Core archive can be used by anyone who can access it through from IBT, or we can share directly this Darwin Core archive with someone that we want to. And if we are registered to GBIF, once we publish here, this Darwin Core archive will be seen by GBIF, and then GBIF will say, imagine that says, hey, another Darwin Core archive was published by this institution. Let's grab it and put it in the portal. And said that way, it seems kind of silly, but that's the simplified version of what happens. So when a new Darwin Core archive is published, if you're registered to GBIF, GBIF can monitor that, and then your file makes it to the GBIF portal. So, sorry, so simple as that. You just work with IPT, and your publishing process is secure. We will see over the days when we work with Darwin Core and when we work with IPT, and then our last day of the workshop with data quality, that of course one has to be careful in different steps. But overall, I would like you to get the idea that this is a process that can be done, that is not impossible, that we can all publish data, and that anything that might be a challenge for you has also been a challenge for someone else before you. So there is a very big community that is willing to help at these different steps. So you're not alone in this, and you'll see that every part of it has good tutorials and has a community willing to help. And so go into that, and with this I will finish. If you have questions about the Darwin Core standard, there are a series of ways in which you can proceed. One is, of course, send us an email to any of us of the instructors in this workshop. We're perfectly fine to receive your questions. Another way is to send them to the bigger community. And there are two initiatives that are tightly related that I want to mention to you. One is the Darwin Core Hour. The Darwin Core Hour is a set of webinars, of talks that we have put together to tackle issues related with Darwin Core. So you can visit those talks in this webpage here. And associated with it, there is this Darwin Core questions and answers site, which is specifically a place where one can go and ask questions. It doesn't matter how complicated the questions are or how silly they are. There is no silly question, and that's what I want to convey here. Anyone can ask whatever they want about the standard, its use, and so on, and the community will answer those questions. You can do it directly on the site, and you can visit other questions that people have posted, or you can send your questions through this form, and so it will automatically be recorded as a question in the site. If you are sending your question through the form, I suggest that you do include your email address so that we can contact you directly or copy you in the answers, and we make sure that you get the answer that you're seeking. So with that, I finish my presentation for today, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation, Paula. So you said we're gonna have questions. So I will tell the people that, the ones who have questions, they can start asking you. So just give me a few seconds.
Yes, no problem.
Donc, pour la fin de présentation là, donc on y a là il y a plein de questions pour mon qui a une question et puis la serré nous gagnons à peu près nous avons un petit temps devant nous. Donc on est sur un bagage.
Alors, et objectif hier, là, tout le monde disait que je tiens à ce que je dis, il y a une meilleure compréhension de comment publier. Et parce que pour aller sur un ensemble de bagages, malgré que les gens en retard, parce que c'est bien saisi, même nous allons reparler ensemble de ça encore. Si nous avons des questions, comment c'est posé, nous regarder ensemble.
OK.
Est-ce que la question c'est yes?
I know you speak English, so go ahead. I don't have to translate that.
Okay,
I will translate for the
she's
people.
She's not the close to the computer. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just want to know about the meta file and metadata.
Meta file and metadata. Okay. So someone would like to have some explanation about about the difference. About meta file and metadata.
Sure. Let me go back to that slide so that I think it will be easier to look at. So, okay. So the difference between meta file and metadata is that one describes the structure of the data set. The structure, that is, what are the columns in that data set and what are their names, basically. And the other, the metadata, describes what the data set is about, like what's its title, who made it, who maintains it, what's the license, and all those, what's the scope, the geographic scope, the temporal scope. So it's information about the data set. That's the metadata. The meta is the structure. So in here is an example of the meta. The meta you see here that it says field 1 modified, field 2 institution code, field 3 collection code. So what it's doing is giving you the structure of the data set. It's telling you its encoding, it's telling you which terms it has, but it's about the structure. The metadata, it's information about the data set. So here you see what's the title, what's the person in charge of that, creating that data set, what's its institution, its role, etc. Does that clarify it?
Do you want me to give an explanation to people? Donc, I'm gonna give the explanation in French or Creole for some people.
Sure.
Ok, Ago Pierre juste pose une question, te demande qui différence qui te gagne entre métadonnées et puis métafile, qui c'est en bon créole métadonnées, et puis il te demandé différence entre données de spécimen file. Donc, il dit comme ça, différence qui gagne, c'est que métadonnées, ça c'est lui-même qui gagne structure là. Il parlait de structure là-dedans, par exemple, et il te parlait de, il te mettait ça là, donc on va regarder là. Est-ce que c'est ça qu'on va regarder là? Non, il va. Donc, il te parlait de, comment dire, qui qualité terme qui parle gain en expliquer, comment dire, terme qui parle gain en dedans, qui gagne rapport avec données spécimen même. Mais quand il y a un spécimen même, il fait référence à information qui gagne sous données spécimen directement. Donc, c'est comme si m'dadou, c'est métafile là, métadonnées, qui décrit structure spécimen et puis données spécimen maintenant c'est là-dedans nous joignons toute information sous données spécimen. Donc comme si nous avons une englobé l'autre.
Donc, confusion là, de métadonnées et spécimens. Alors, question, c'était métaphase.
Métaphase et métadata. Donc, moi, je ne sais pas si c'est mon thème à suivre, mais l'homme tape.
Ok. Non, mais il y a une petite explication en plus. Si on a un tableau, et on a une donnée qui parle dans le tableau, c'est métaphase là qui explique mes données pour gagner. On peut gagner premier nom, on peut gagner pays, on peut gagner ceci. Ça, c'est métaphase. Données à métadata, même si données, ok, on peut collecter une plante et cavaillon, mais qui s'attire mais non plante là, et ça est non plante là, ça m'a pas métadonnées, plante ça, ils seront obligés, ils gagnent fleur rouge, ça c'est ce qu'on appelle le metadata. Mais le metafile, c'est ça qui l'a comme ça. C'est des bagages qui sont liés à Darwin Core.
C'est comme un fichier.
C'est comme ok.
Alors, nous avons métadonnées à étiquette.
Oui, qui décrit toute qui décrit information yo. Oui. By données sur yo. Donc voilà encore, et ça on a fait là, c'est extrêmement important. Par exemple, le ministère de l'Environnement ensemble avec nous, Haïti qui doit gagner propre métadonnées et puis si le ministère de l'Environnement voulait que chaque institution qui dans le pays a yo balle de données, il faut qu'il décrire standard par standard JPIF là, définir métaphile. Il va le déterminer métaphile, parce que ça, c'est des langages de base de données qu'on se prend là. Donc, tout qu'on doit connaître, langage là, yo, peut être capable de publier sous JPIF de façon générale. Mais je pense que nous, ouais, ça, c'est pas un bagage qui est écrit facile, nous nous faisons base de données, et puis nous faisons base de données, nous mettons. Donc, il va faire base de données pour nous, parce qu'il va respecter l'ensemble de bagages qui sont standards.
Okay, one more question too. Okay, thank you, Paula, for the answers. So I have one question.
Okay.
Yes, sure.
So you talked about certain data that cannot be mapped. So I think I got confused a little bit. So what are we supposed to do with the ones that cannot be mapped? How can we share them?
Well, we have three options, really. Let me look for the options here. We have three options depending on, first, if you want to share them or not. So, for example, you may have in your database information that is about your particular institution. Like, for example, if the specimens are on loan, and to whom, and for how long, or the number of the shelf where you store the specimens, those kind of information you might not want to share with the rest of the world. Those are internal fields to your institution. So for those, you just don't include them. I mean, you have them in your database, but when you do the mapping in IPT that we're going to see on Thursday, you just don't map it. And if you don't map it, they don't appear in the data. Simply as that. Now, if you have extra information that doesn't map directly or indirectly to Darwin Core, and you still want to share it, we have two options. One is to use general fields that can be fields, for example, for remarks. Darwin Core has several remarks fields. One is occurrence remarks, location remarks, identification remarks, georeference remarks. So you can use those and put the information there. Or in a field that is called dynamic properties, that's the name of the field, that allows you to capture those additional data, those characteristics about the occurrences, about the specimens. That's the second option. The thing about this second option is that it looks like this. So in a single field, you would put a lot of information all together. So if you have a lot of extra information, this cell, this field becomes very crowded. Let's say it has too much to look at. I mean, it's possible, but sometimes it's a little inconvenient, let's say. And so the third option that we have is to share using extensions. And that's the other part that we saw today. Depending on the type of data that you want to share, the type of information, extra information, you can use different extensions. So for example, if you have information about measurements or colors or I don't know, something about the specimens, you can use the extension that is called measurements or facts. And there is another one that is called extended measurements or facts. Now, if you had information about photos of the specimen, you could use the audible media description extension. If you had extra information about identifications, for example, you had a plant in your herbarium and different people identify it over time differently, so you have different identifications for the same specimen, you can use an identification history extension. There are several extensions for related with DNA. So there are a bunch of GGBN extensions as well to share DNA data. And so you can visit the web page here. I think I put the link there somewhere here. So I'll bring you to it to show you what it looks like.
Okay.
So these are the possible the register extensions registered in GBIF. So you see you have a bunch of GGBN that have to do with DNA information. All those. You have for traits, measurements and descriptors. You have for taxa, for species distributions. Here you have for names, for vernacular names. For example, those are common names of the species. This is the extended measurements or facts that I was mentioning before. The audible media description that is for media, images, videos, and so on. So there are many extensions available that one could use. So what I recommend is that you take a look at the extensions webinar that is available through the Darwin Core Hour initiative. I will share the link with all of you later and also in the description of this video.
Okay, thank you.
So that I can point you to that one to see more details.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if we have other questions. We have another question. Okay, go ahead and then I'll take that one après ça. Darwin Core extension. Okay, someone would just Sargin, bien-aimé, she would like to have like a quick summary about Darwin Core extension. What is it exactly?
Well, extensions are, I'll show you the slide, but extensions are files that contain additional information to the information that is included in the core file. So let me give you an example. An example might be easier to understand. So suppose that you have a herbarium a herbarium collection, right? So you have all your plants, and each plant was collected by someone in a certain place at a certain date, and well, you know which plant is which. I mean, you know its scientific name. So your table in your database will probably have one record for each plant, and you will have for each record what plant it is, where it was collected, when it was collected. And so you will have all that table that has occurrences. So you will have a core of occurrences. Now, for each of those plants, you might have several photos. And so if you have several photos, each photo has a bunch of information that is, for example, who took the photo, the license, when they took it, etc. And so each of the photos will have all that information. You have several photos linked to a single plant. And so that information about the photos is what you would share in an extension. So you would have two tables, one table for the plants information and one table for the photos information. So we can think it about in that way, as two different tables, where the second table will be linked to the first one. And so each photo in the second table will be related to the specimens in the first table through identifiers, saying specimen 1 has photos 1, 2, 3. Specimen 2 has photos 4, 5, 6. Does this make sense? Does this explain?
Do you understand?
Très simple, on va aller sur le terrain, pour ensemble de développement, et sur un extrader au niveau de plateforme pour carré, ou plateforme pour tel bagage, on a besoin de mettre information sur ça pour qui parle en Darwin Core là, on va le mettre pour extension pour capable péter. Simple, besoin de petite vidéo, mais de besoin de un lien pour dire côté vidéo. Par exemple, on doit avoir accès sur qui parle en JPG, on doit film faire publier un bagage sur JPG. Et puis, une exception qui allait sur le website qui est capable de beaucoup plus d'informations. C'est l'éco-KBT, la licence. On doit mettre un lien sur Facebook.
Oui, c'est là dans l'option toute information additionnelle. Photo, lien, licence.
That's the exception.
Tout ça.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Paula. We have another question. Il y a une autre question.
Sure.
It's up to you. If you can speak English, go ahead. Yeah.
I see that you use a lot of JSON in XML files. So I want to know what type of SGBD that you use for GB.
Sorry, the last part of the question I didn't get. What type of what we use for GBIF?
What type of SGBD that you use? Why?
Yeah, SGBD that you use for GB.
For GBIF.
I know there is two kinds of SGBD. There is NoSQL and SQL. So I mean relational database and no relational database. What type do you use for GB?
So yeah, can you hear him?
Barely. If you can repeat his question, please.
So he said he knows that there is two kind of SGBDs, the relational and non-relational database. So he would like to know what type of SGBD that you use for GBIF.
What type of database? Well, it doesn't matter really. You can use whatever database you want. So GBIF does not use any particular database. So for example, you can have your data in a very complex, sophisticated database, or you can also have it in an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't really matter. So GBIF does not impose any particular database nor format for it. So the idea is that each one can have the data as they can and as it makes more sense for them to manage. And from those databases or Excel spreadsheets or whatever you use, you can extract the information and you can link the, what you will do will be to upload a file into IPT or to connect your database. It's also possible to directly connect a database and do a mapping. So it doesn't really matter what kind of database you have in the back end. You will have to, of course, make sure that you do the mapping correctly and that you connect different parts of your database where they should be. But you can choose whatever system you want. That's up to you, up to your institution, up to your internal organization needs. GBIF does not impose any of that.
So you mean GBIF doesn't use any specific one? That's what you mean?
No, that's exactly what I mean. GBIF does not ask people to use any specific way. As I said, if you have your data in an Excel spreadsheet, you can share it. There is no problem. You don't need to have a very sophisticated database.
Okay, I think he really he was really talking about, I mean, GBIF itself, since you share the data, so he wanted to know what type of app, as you part of GBIF, what type of SGBD that you use.
Truthfully, I cannot answer for the technical part of GBIF. For that, I would recommend that you contact the technical team if you want to know the details about that, because I don't know them enough to answer your question. If you're looking for from the GBIF side,
yeah,
for their data store, and that you should consult with the infrastructure, the technical team, the infrastructure team in GBIF. If you want, we can put you in contact with them, no problem.
Okay, thank you so much, Paula. You have a question?
Yeah, alors, son question sont un peu de remarques. Dans l'exercice que l'État fait, par exemple, les communautés choisies, qui est-ce qui peut pour identifier qui mot à doit utiliser. Recorded by, identified by, named by. Donc, tu constaté que tu as gagné et qui était sous tableau, qui était en deux mots, mais qui est tout qui était en un seul mot. Par exemple, recorded by. Maintenant, ça ne t'a voulu, bon, on est que nous maîtriser exactement qui est-ce qui bon là-dedans. Est-ce que c'est utiliser un seul mot, ou est-ce que c'est deux mots?
Okay. So, Mr. Theogen has another question. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
So he was talking about the exercise that we were doing a while ago. So he said we use different type of words. Like we had an example as recorded by. I mean, he said he saw that there were recorded by that was written in 2 words, and there were recorded by that was 1 word. So he wanted to know which one exactly is the right one.
Well, I will go back to the answers. We got 10 answers. So in here, I don't see the exact answer, really, the correct one. So the correct one would be the name that is in there and written like that. I don't know if you get to see it. Maybe you can enlarge a little bit. So that will be the actual name, that will be the correct one for that answer. Recorded and by, written together and with capital B. So that's the name of this term. Now, one caveat and one thing to consider is that when you use it in your database, you can put it however you want. And you can call it collector or observer instead of recorded by. And that's perfectly fine. Now, if you do that, when it comes to the mapping step, you will have to map that to recorded by. And that's an exercise that we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to work with Darwin Core to do mapping. Now, if you have, and this is something that might be useful for you to consider, if you have the names of your columns already as Darwin Core terms, the mapping in IPT is automatic because IPT recognizes the Darwin Core terms and does the mapping for you. For anything that is not in Darwin Core, you will have to map it manually. But you can have it with whichever name.
Just to make it clear, you said if it's already in our database, that's what you said, or our Darwin Core?
If you have it already in Darwin Core, I mean, with this name, you could have it with this name, or you could have, for example, observer. If the name of your column is recorded by, as it's written here, IPT would recognize it because it will say, hey, this matches exactly this Darwin Core term. And so it will map it automatically. If instead the name of your column was observer, observer doesn't exist as a term in Darwin Core, and then IPT will not recognize it, and you will have to map it manually within IPT. You will have to go and choose the mapping. We will see that on Thursday anyway. We'll practice that.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So, dis je di kon sa, si par exemple, il di kon sa la, pou li men vremen c'est ça. C'est ça qui écrit avec, qui commence avec R minuscule, et puis qui a un seul mot, et puis qui gagne B majuscule là. Pour lui même, c'est ça qui est correct là. Mais pour nous dit par exemple, si ou même, vous gagnez un nom disponible dans Darwin Core déjà, s'il l'a déjà, donc IPT a lui-même l'a automatiquement créé quand la pour la fait map là pour automatiquement. Mais pour si c'est pas un mot ça, par exemple, si vous avez un mot qui par exemple observateur, mais qui pas dans Darwin Core là, donc on a la même nom pour obligé et comme si cartographier manuellement pour contour parce que IPT a lui-même n'est pas reconnaître. Elle dit pour lui-même n'est pas exister parce que il pas exister dans Darwin Core là. Ça veut dire.
Alors vous faites remarquer ça, c'est en fait dans mise en place de données souvent un standard qui va suivre une fois pour ta dévier l'information ça va prendre. Définitivement même si on peut gagner un passeport il n'y a pas d'espace là dans le métro espace là-dedans, il ne peut pas connaître. Donc, c'est un langage de base de données qui est lié. Ça veut dire que son besoin est lié. Tout ce qu'on fait, rentrer sur GBI bien, besoin à la Darwin Core là, pour vraiment langage, parce que le codé qui baille, mais pour être capable de reconnaître. Mais si vous mettez la identifier recorded by, vous mettez recorded by la B a seulement retire en majuscule, vous mettez la minuscule, vous ne pouvez pas gagner même bagaille encore. Donc, ça me pense que OpenRefine, nous avons l'autre bail qui parle d'analyse de données, qui permettre nous capables de contrôler si il y a une erreur un côté qui parle avec Darwin Core là, comment on est capable de faire.
Donc, on a pris une seule dernière question pour nous quitter conclure jusqu'à parce que presque 11 heures.
OK.
Oui, il a parlé de numérisation, donc il faut partager de l'émission et puis
okay, so Paula, we have one more question. So you were talking about the taxon core. So you said they were supposed to share the same region. Okay, you said they have to share the same characteristics, but what if they don't have the same? What's gonna happen?
Well, you use the taxon core is basically a checklist. So you always build a checklist with some common characteristic, either the place where those taxa come from, or some other characteristic. But there's always something in common. Otherwise you will be making a list of species of where or what, or you have to say what the list of species is about, let's say. So for example, you can make a checklist of the plant species from Haiti, or you can make another checklist of the endangered species from Haiti. And so there you have a common location, that is Haiti, and a common characteristic in the last one, that is they are endangered. So you will always have some kind of common ground that you're grouping the taxa under. You could have I don't know, something from some marine checklist, like polychaetes from some area. Does that answer your question? Or do you have an example in particular that you want to ask about?
Alors, il parlait de deux bagages, c'est corps là avec extension. Corps là, c'est tout ça qui est nécessaire que nous besoin. Par exemple, dans Darwin Core là, son regardé à un paquet de langage que Darwin Core là gagne. Mais ça n'a pas là, parle de checklist. Le checklist, c'est un côté comment c'est le dire what, where, and when. Donc, c'est ça. On doit avoir un balai qui pour ça. Mais on doit mettre au niveau de taxon forme de qui ça lié, est-ce que c'est une plante active, est-ce que c'est une plante exotique, est-ce que y a des informations sur lui. On doit être une plante de journée de collecter en Inde et puis collecter en Haïti, par exemple, ça pirata indica. Donc on doit gagner même taxa qui s'allie, c'est non. Et puis quand événement, c'est toute information que nous sommes capables de prendre autour de spécimens ça, autour de plantes capable de faire. Donc bref, on explication sur les toujours pour que nous ayons une meilleure compréhension de.
Okay, thank you so much, Paula. I don't know, do you have something to say? And I will give a chance to Carly and Annabella to say something either. Too.
Okay, well, what I have to say, to ask is if you have any other questions. If you have one last question, we can do one more. And of course, you can gather your questions for later. And
yeah,
and that will be no problem.
We are running out of time, so I can just take the question and then send them to you after if there is more. And I think that's the best way, since we have like 3 minutes, and I would like to give all of you a chance to say something, and I will give one participant a chance to say something to you.
Something before that, for the on-site, I will do the resume of what you already say about the Darwin Core, everything like that. And after we are going to take some pictures and coming to see if we can build the Darwin Core.
Okay, so for those attending the live stream, we're going to continue with our sessions next this coming Thursday, not tomorrow, but the day after, and we're going to do a demo session on IPT. But for the people in the workshop, we will keep working tomorrow with Darwin Core. We will do some hands-on exercises. So I'll pass it to you, Marie, and to Annabella and to Carly.
Okay, thank you so much, Paula, for your presentation. So Annabella and Carly, I think you have something to say, because you haven't said anything because we didn't have a chance to. So there is the time to say something, I guess.
Well, thank you, Marino. Just remember it to everybody, if they have question, just to send it. And I believe that everything is going to be more clear after the hands-on session. And just don't be afraid, and just keep all your questions to send to us, and well, we're going to work with that. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you so much, Annabella, and thank you, Paula. Carly?
Okay, so that she's not the one.
Oh, she's probably not on the room. Yeah. Ok, de di gen participant ki te vle di yon bagay matin, just an nan tout participant yo, paske nou va vreman interagi direktman avek yo. Donc, si gen moun ki volontaire, just rapidman, ki vle di yon bagay nan tout participant. You speak English. I mean, yon moun ki pale anglais la an ale, yon moun ki pale français an ale, map tradu rapid pou nou. Matin ou te premier volontaire ou te propose sa, donc an ale. So we'll have one of the participants will just honest to say a few things to you. So just wanted to let you know.
Okay, we're listening.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna translate for him.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the training. Okay, and we are all ready to participate and make our plan, to realize our plan, because we are here for that. I mean, he's talking about making Haiti part of GBIF. So, so thank you so much, Paula, and thank you, Annabella. So that's what he had to say. And I think I will see you all tomorrow again. But Mr. William and I, we will keep on doing the planning during the whole day, and let us know if you have any questions or any requests.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in taking part of this workshop. And yes, we will continue tomorrow with our hands-on session.